Hello and welcome to this special panel celebrating 45 years of the galaxy's greatest comic. Today we're joined by a panel of comedians and comedy writers to tell us all about what effect 2000 AD has had on them. I'm Toby Venables, author and screenwriter, co-writer of the BAFTA-winning His House, which I mention at every available opportunity. And with me is Joel Morris, one of the authors of Ladybird books for grown-ups, as well as one of the brains behind the Family Examiner, Touch of Frost, Radio 4's Angstrom. Award-winning stand-up Dane Baptiste, comedy writer and musician, and science fiction novelist Mitch Benn. Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Before I do anything else, I just wanted to do this.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
That's the nerd
Good reaction. Good reaction.
Well, I just wanted to gauge the reaction. I just wanted to gauge.
Is that the one with the single greatest frame of all time in it?
Goes into the Fist of Dread.
Goes into the Fist of Dread. Is that in there? Is that in that one? Because it's definitely in the First Dark Judges story. I mean, I think it's in the last episode of the first. That looks like to be the first episode of the First Dark Judges story. So it's possibly not in that one.
Not that one.
It would have been about 2 weeks later. The single greatest frame in them.
Are we going to do a nerd test? Can anyone tell you which prog that is? I think it's 224.
Oh, hello.
My goodness.
Oh, I'm feeling thoroughly outgunned now.
Is it
225?
Oh my word!
But this leads me to the first actual question, which is, when did you first become aware of 2000 AD? Start with Mitch.
All right. You have, I'm assuming, at least become aware of, if not read, Scarred for Life and Scarred for Life 2. One of the authors of Scarred for Life is a guy called Stephen Brotherston. I was at Dovedale Primary School with Stephen Brotherston in the 1970s. Stephen Brotherston, although he keeps this a bit quiet, is the most naturally gifted comic book artist I've ever met. And when we were about 9 years old, we used to do comics together. I'd write them and he'd draw them. He could draw like Brian Bolland when he was 9. Anyway, it was, I'm fairly sure, through Stephen Brotherston that I became aware of 2000 AD. It took me a couple of years. Because I didn't get into it till 79. The first one I bought was Prog 129. And what I've done since is sort out the collected editions for all the big stories that I missed. So I bought like the 2-volume edition of Judge Caligula as soon as that came out. Then bought the Cursed Earth as soon as that came out. But yeah, and I got very heavily on board. Didn't miss a single prog until I went to live out the country for 2 years in 1990. And by the time I got back, I found it kind of hard to get back into it. And it wasn't just that I was, in my 20s now. When the documentary came out a couple of years ago, I was actually quite pleased to discover that the general consensus is that it went a bit off the boil in the early 90s. Because I did find it kind of hard to get back into. But, my affection for it remains undimmed. And as I'm sure we'll go on to discuss, its impact on the comedy world and ultimately in popular culture in general, I think can't really be overstated.
My story's not made necessarily as detailed. I think I just went over to a neighbour across the road's house, and my neighbour Calvert, he had a bunch of miscellaneous 2000 AD and other comics lying around, and those were the first ones he was prepared to part with, that he would trust somebody of my age to look after. And yeah, I think for myself, I'd never seen kind of like that pulp fiction style of animation in a cartoon before. And I think a lot of the time, a lot of my peers were either trying to build dinosaurs or reading much lighter material. But I think it was the pencilship that I saw in like Nemesis the Warlock and Judge Dredd.
Wow.
And yeah, it kind of drew me immediately. And I probably at the time, because I was quite young, didn't have the benefit of being able to read it as canon or in order, and also and there was only one comic shop in Lewisham at the time, Skinny Malinks, and I wasn't allowed to go there by myself. But I was able to kind of piece together an idea of the canon and an overview for the arcs of the various titles by just getting different stuff. But essentially, 2000 D was like my gateway drug when it came to my comic book addiction.
So what age were you then? What age was that?
Must have been, around the same age as Mitch, maybe 7 or 8. And then, that definitely influenced me to start making comics of my own. And then just finding more out about the genre. I think 2000 AD was so influential. Like today even, I don't really read fiction novels because I'm just like, they just really can't compete like visually as well as editorially. And so so essentially 2000 AD is the reason why I don't really read fiction novels.
Ruined everything else.
Ruined everything. It's just, it's too hard to live up to, and there's always this way that people are like, who can't read books without pictures. But I'm like, I don't think you've seen these pictures. They're really, really good. They're really good. They might take as long as it takes to write something down. That's how good these pictures are. So.
Or longer.
Actually. Yeah, or longer, yeah.
Maybe that's just the way I write. But anyway, Joel.
I was about the same age. I was about 9 or 10, and I was a massive Star Wars fan. I'm Generation Star Wars, so I'd buy anything that looked like it had robots and spacemen in it. And I went to a jumble sale, and there was a single copy of 2000 AD at the jumble sale, and it was issue 131. And I was buying that and reading it at home and reading it until it was all worn out, and I'd never read anything like it. And it was because it was two reasons. One, it was really funny, and Star Wars isn't very funny. It was just really clever. And it was also, and I think this is really important for 2000 AD, it was clearly for kids maybe 6 years older than me. And obviously it wasn't. It was meant to be for 9-year-olds, and you're meant to read it and think, this is for kids 6 years older than me. And I remember going to see the Dread movie when it came out with a bunch of old 2000 AD heads, and we went to see it, and we all came out of it a bit shocked about how violent it was. And I went, I think that's a 25 certificate film. As in, like, it's too old. It's still too old for us. And I loved the level of violence in it was cartoonish enough to be funny. Like, it was so over the top, but also you went, shit. And it had the same impact as when I was talking to Rufus Jones, the comedy writer, about this recently. When a friend told you in the playground, you've got to go and see Road to the Lost Ark, a guy's head explodes. It had that feeling of playground. It was playground.
As long as that style, it was really kind of like a golden era of stylized violence then, because it kind of was running concurrently alongside, like, your Hellraiser franchises and your Nightmare on Elm Streets and RoboCop, because Paul Verhoeven's kind of stylized violence, I think I discovered that around the same time I discovered 2000 AD.
Well, it's a funny thing, because I think that obviously for the year I was getting into it was sort of before Video Nasties and video shops came out, but it seemed to just completely plug into that, as in the video boxes and video game boxes looked like they'd been drawn by 2000 AD artists. It was a part of a culture that fed into video art, video movies, Evil Dead movies, that kind of shit. It all sort of seemed to be part of the same thing, and it was designed to frighten your parents. But be completely safe in a sort of Alice Cooper-y way. It's the most horrifying thing possible. You're completely safe. These guys will look after you. But your parents would look over your shoulder and go, shit, are you reading? That guy's head just came off.
Yeah. Actually, my dad loved it. Because my dad grew up on sort of, pulp sci-fi novels, your Ray Heinleins. And I think one of the things which really won him over was when they did Stainless Steel Rat, because he read all those books when they came out in the 60s. And that, that was a pretty ballsy thing for just a weekly British inky to do, was to not only do a full-scale adaptation of a very respected sci-fi novel. I've often wondered how the rights negotiations for that even came about. Actually going to the Harry House and going, so we want to adapt a Stainless Steel Rat, but as an episodic comic book, and not even just a comic book in its own right, as just a single strand in a multi-strand comic book. And then the sheer baller move of actually casting him as James Coburn. It's not only we could make this, who would we be if we were making the movie? Who would this have been? It would have been draw him as James, Carlos. Draw him as James Coburn. And I remember thinking that was a really, because and then that got me into the rest of the Harry Harrison books, and then immediately hoovered all those up.
That's like the Clint Eastwood chin, isn't it?
Dirty Harry.
Yeah. When you're talking about them doing classic sci-fi, they didn't do classic sci-fi. They didn't do pompous sci-fi. They didn't do Isaac Asimov. They chose a funny sci-fi book. And I remember you're talking about not reading books. I did 7 years on Radio 5 as the book reviewer, and I don't read fucking books. I'm really lazy with my reading because of 2000 AD. I'm completely with Dane on this. I was completely lazy with it. But I did read all the Harry Harrison books because they were in 2000 AD. I would read any book that I thought might be a bit like 2000 AD. I got into Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy because I thought it would be a bit like 2000 AD. I would read any textbook that looked like it might be as much fun as the comic, and I think only read books that I think might be a bit like 2000 AD.
I mean,
you're right. I mean, the humor is absolutely essential, and there's a very specific kind of humor. It's this really sort of gallows humor, I mean, that's why, you mentioned sort of the 2012 Judge Dredd movie. For my money, I still don't think they've really nailed Judge Dredd properly. I mean, I think
yes, they have.
You mentioned
Once,
it already. I think
RoboCop.
What's that? Well, I was going to say, that's literally what I was going to say. I was going to say RoboCop's a better Judge Dredd movie than either of the two Judge Dredd movies.
Have you seen the original costume design? It's one of the most absolutely I got you photographs you can ever see. Look for the original costume design for RoboCop. He's got Judge Dredd's helmet. They literally just copied it across. It is a total.
Now you say it makes the whole RoboCop thing make so much more sense. Even the weapon especially, because it's like the smart gun is just like the semi-automatic handgun with like the extended rifle. Yeah.
Everything. It's a complete.
The lawgiver, right?
But it's like an IP raid. They're trying to adapt the comic strip without paying for it.
But the point is exactly. The thing about RoboCop is it gets the humor of Judge Dredd. In a way that, to my money, I can understand why the 2012 movie is as grim as it did, because the reason everybody hated the 1995 movie, well, the main reason everybody hated the 1995 movie is because Rob Schneider and it's full of jokes. So it's just like, okay, we'll do this one. No jokes. Now, the problem with the 95 movie is not that it's full of jokes, it's that it's full of shit jokes. The comic book is replete with jokes. The comic book is hysterically funny, and there's only a couple of moments in the 2012 movie where it tries to get that. I like the bit where the kids stick him up and say, "Freeze, Judge," and he just turns very slowly and says, "Why?"
If you're talking about influence and things, I think one of the things that it did to me is it means that I hadn't even thought about this before. I can't take seriously any serious movie, certainly any serious comic book movie. I can't enjoy DC movies. I can't enjoy dark movies, and I find that the Marvel movies worked for me because they were funny and witty and in a very 2000 AD sort of smart ass, culturally aware way. Anytime I go and see, even the Tim Burton ones were too dark for me. I want this. I think what 2000 AD arrives at for a lot of kids is at exactly the point where they've just grown out of Spider-Man and grown out of the Adam West Batman, which is funny and fun. And it goes, here's some more grown-up fun. But then the next stage you're supposed to get into in comics is to go for really dark, troubled, Frank Miller-y stuff. And I never really loved that as much as I loved it being funny.
Actually, like Guardians of the Galaxy, that relationship with Marvel is an interesting one, like with the comics and the films. But particularly like Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor Ragnarok. It's like they're so 2000 AD.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Ragnarok so much. Even now, absolutely. Sorry.
No, go on.
But even now, like when you look back at DC, like the influence is very clear, particularly with the recent introduction of the Batman who laughs. He pretty much looks like he looks like Judge Death, and even the whole thing of the alternate Earths and these alternate versions of Batman, you really do begin to see that kind of 2000 AD like futuristic dystopian influence. Nowadays, still doing
that mixture, that sort of shift into. I remember being really disappointed when I remember going to a comic shop when Dark Knight came out, and I would have been about 14, 15. I went to a comic shop and Dark Knight was out, and I went, "Oh, this looks beautiful!" And I opened up and, "Oh, fuck, it's Batman." I was so annoyed with Batman, not Judge Dredd. It wasn't Strontium Dog. It wasn't any of the funny, really good superheroes. And I got that sort of British American thing going, "Oh shit! When they spend all the money, they'll spend it on American stuff, won't they? They won't spend it on British stuff." And there was a real disappointment as a teenager that there wasn't going to be a shift. What they were going to do is they were going to buy all the British artists and writers and import them to America and make them write their boring American comics. And I still feel that I think the thing that was missing was 2000 AD growing up and then becoming a huge entertainment franchise, which would have been like Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor Ragnarok all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I want to sort of, sorry, Mitch.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. We've kicked this one to death.
Like just like trying to sort of pin down what that humor, because I've got some issues here, and this I absolutely loved, where it was just where being immensely obese becomes a fad. So there's stuff called flab on to and there's the belly wheel. The belly wheel, that's just such a genius thing, which couldn't exist in real life. It could only exist on these pages. Pinning down that humour.
A friend of mine at school, that issue meant his dad banned him from reading 2000 AD. His dad was much posher than me. And his dad was a scientist, and he said that could never happen. We're not buying that anymore. And I was sitting on a bus explaining that could never happen is not a reason not to enjoy fiction.
Kind of, it wipes out quite a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, but it was a sudden revelation that either you got the joke or you didn't get the joke.
Yeah, well, I remember reading somewhere. It was in a review, I think, of one. I think it was in an article because they're always trying to get the Judge Dredd TV show going, which, if anything, would be the best place for him. Would be, HBO Max or Netflix or something. Would be the best place for Judge Dredd, something episodic. Because part of the point of Dredd is that he himself doesn't really have a character arc. That's the whole point. He is cast in stone, and the star of the scripts really is not Dredd. It's the city. And it's the megas, and it's all what crazy shit have the megas got up to this week?
It's the Simpsons with weaponry. It's a high explosive Simpsons.
Yeah, and how is Dredd going to wearily sort it out at the end? The
joke of Dredd is that he doesn't enjoy the city as much as I do. The joke is he doesn't laugh at this incredibly funny. So basically, he's a deadpan. He's Buster Keaton. He's Philomena Kunk. He's the non-laughing middle of this very funny situation. And
only one the joke. Yeah, he's in permanent for fuck's sake mode, isn't he? That's the whole point. Now what the fuck are you doing? Now what
Meldrew with a helmet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He's in this permanent sort of,
That's very well put. Meldrew with a helmet. Yeah, exactly.
But somebody, I think it was in an article about this, defined that the sense of humor with Judge Dredd is imagine everything that's stupid about America. Now imagine it just keeps getting stupider for the next 200 years.
In which case, do you know the biggest cultural impact? That's just to go to it. Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto is Judge Dredd done again. It's someone from outside America looking at America and saying, what if it got 10 times worse? And that becomes the biggest entertainment franchise of the 2000s. And then that's Scottish people laughing at American culture, which is what basically 2000 AD was.
Yeah, basically, Which was
one of whom was the drummer in my band at university. All right, John.
Really?
I'll never see him again.
But that's that is the most 2000 AD sense of humour I think I've seen transferred to another medium.
No, you're absolutely right.
It's the same joke. I was trying to explain to my kid recently. I said, it's not serious. Grand Theft Auto isn't serious. It's a joke. Because they knew about it as a cultural thing, but didn't know what it was. I went, it's not meant to be all the fear about, and again, the same fears about, will it corrupt kids? You go, no, if you get the joke, it's a safe place to take the piss out of this.
Yeah, and also we're past the point of will it corrupt kids because we're way ahead. I mean,
it's a joke about how those kids are already corrupted anyway. So.
Thinking about that, like the leading out from the sort of source material and how it's kind of sent these ripples out and affected a bunch of other things. I mean, where do you see that influence, and also how has it influenced you?
There's a direct specific influence, isn't it, in what it did to the industry? Because if you start, there is a general consensus of opinion that, comic books, graphic novels, whatever, was kind of reinvented as an art form, given a whole new level of status in the mid-late 1980s. But if you rattle off a list of the people who were generally held responsible for that, generally credited with that revivification of comic books, with pretty much the sole exception of Frank Miller, they're all ex-2000 AD guys. It's Alan Moore, it's Neil Gaiman, it's Pat Mills, it's Dave Gibbons, it's Brian Bolland, it's all those guys. As Joel pointed out, ended up going over to the States and kind of reinventing the American comic book industry for them. And this had all kinds of effects. One of which is, as we point out, this introduction of this bizarre sense of humor to a lot of this, because American comic books can get hideous, even before Frank Miller, American comics could get hideously po-faced. But also what I really noticed, and I remember noticing happening this at the time, was it totally revolutionized comic book artwork. And I think this is partly because back in the day, classic 2000 AD, it only had 4 color pages. It had the back and front cover, and it had the center spread, and everything else was black and white. So American comic book art in the 70s and early 80s had gotten very, very formulaic, and it tended to be line drawings that would then be given like 4 color colorization.
A lot of people trying to mimic Jack Kirby or Lopez and
exactly. But then you get guys like Bond, guys like Carlos Esquerra, guys, and they their penmanship is extraordinary because they're not doing line drawings and handing them over to colorists. They're having to create all this perspective and dynamic just literally with a black pen, And so, but one of the other things I think, which is a direct benefit that the 2000 AD had was creating, if you like, the celebrity comic book creator, because they very, very prominently credited the people making the strips in a way that I don't recall being done certainly not in British comic books.
But why that was Kevin O'Neill, who obviously was just the art gopher, the fixer of the office, the young lad, suggested with issue 1, what if I paste a little box in the corner with everyone's name on? And it was a suggestion just of the art gopher. It was just him going, these are my friends, they should have their names in it. And that blew my mind as a kid, because I could read who did it. I could then have favourites. And that then corrupted the industry, because it then meant that the Americans could do like celebrity transfers, like the football transfer market. Suddenly these guys were worth money, and it wrecked 2000 AD because they were all poached.
And to the point, also to the point where I guess the movement that we saw of that nature with 2000 AD would have led to that late or mid 90s phenomenon of the creation of like Image Comics, where you had celebrity artists like Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee and Tom McFarlane, who ended up leaving the larger publishers and doing like independent stuff. And then when you see kind of independent style that did kind of, it moved away from the more formulaic panel work, as you said, then it became a lot more reminiscent of 2000 AD artwork.
But I wonder how that seemed to sort of, if we're talking about comedy and the influence of it on comedy, one of the things that seemed to make it work for me as a kid, because comedy is about juxtaposition of tone, that you use a posh voice and you swear, whatever. It's the granny rapping joke. Is that the thing?
Yes.
One of the things that seemed to work for me was that the amount of time that had been spent clearly drawing, that nothing was rushed. It was very, very careful drawing. Stuff. And then you did really stupid jokes using that thing, and it was like building the most. It felt like the Day to Day does, where they built an enormous set to do a stupid joke. And it felt like those really great jokes in Airplane, where they drive an entire plane through an airport terminal for a dumb gag. And it felt like these people had. There's two levels to that. One is that there's a contrast with the elaborate, beautiful staging, and then a quip in a bubble that undermines it. And the other one was the thing that's always important to kids. I talk about this a lot when we talk about the Ladybird books. Kids like being given something that looks like someone's worked hard on it. A Ladybird illustrations are absolutely beautiful. You're often given shit as a kid, stuff that's been tossed off, and you can tell when you've been given a Shirley Hughes book or a beautiful Posey Simmons book or a beautiful Brian Bolland piece of artwork. You felt special. They made this for me, and they made it for me, and it's got a bum joke in it, and it's drawn by someone who's as good as Michelangelo. Those levels are thrilling to have. You go. It was the fact they'd undermine it with humour, because the very easy thing to do. And I think I went off 2000 AD a little bit when it got pompous. When there would be very elaborate drawings and then very, very epic Tolkien-esque pronouncements, I go, no, that's not as much fun as when it was a big fat man they'd drawn with a belly wheel. That was just, you spent days drawing that stupid joke. I loved that.
I think some of it is there's this juxtaposition of elements, isn't there? And it's kind of like, and there's this genetic connection with Spaced, and then everything that comes from Spaced. Which is just, space is just like shot through with it all. Anyway, but it's like Shaun of the Dead it's like this very serious, not at all funny, really horrible genre of the zombie apocalypse. Night of the Living Dead, which doesn't have many laughs in it really. But then you do it in Crouch End, and it's like inherently fun before anyone's even said or done anything. Just that. It's happening in Britain, and it's like everything's a bit crap. And
they seem to. It's funny when you talk about what influences had on you, because there's an article of Faith. There's a brilliant Ken Campbell quote. He said that Ken Campbell, who I love, the sort of the provocateur theatre lunatic. Ken Campbell said any art that doesn't have jokes in it should have its funding removed. The job of art is to reflect life, and life's got jokes in it. And I genuinely feel that. When I watch something on TV or a film or something, there's no jokes in it, I tend to go, well, this isn't realistic. Because people laugh, and stuff in life is ridiculous. And the great thing about 2000 AD, it had these amazing, like, world-class artists. I mean, better than world-class comics artists. And it slaved them to making me delighted, a kid delighted and laugh. And it wasn't afraid to have jokes. It didn't feel that putting jokes in it made the artwork less.
Means it in some way. Yeah, that's very, very perceptive. I mean, one of the other things about featuring the credits as prominently as it did is that I think it certainly gave me an appreciation, not just of comic book art, but of different styles of comic book art, because you would get artists working on the same strip with styles so radically divergent. For example, 1 week you'd get, Bolland doing Dread. And Bolland is almost photorealistic with these incredibly accurate facial expressions and everything. Next week, it's Mike McMahon, who looks like he does everything with a burnt stick. But it's still recognizably Judge Dredd. It still makes it well. Then you get Carlos Esquerra, does everything with dots, like one of those guys who's lost the use of their arms and paints with their mouth. Carlos Esquerra does everything with dots. And then you get Ron Smith, who draws, almost parodically cliched 1950s comic book figures, but did the most incredible cityscapes. And they'd just be there in the background. And you think, that's taking him hours. And it's not even what that frame's about. It's just what's behind him while he sits on his bike and has a conversation. There'd be an overhead shot of Dredd on his bike, and the roads are layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of road disappearing, and you realise he's standing like 1,000 feet up in the air above multiple layers of roadway.
That's a good example of like somewhere you can get a joke from, and a joke can come from something being too big. Exaggeration is funny, and the bigness of it. I think that's really hard to do in a film. Is to make something so big it's funny, and that's
one thing with the 95 Dredd got. Yeah, it's one thing that the Sylvester Stallone Judge Dredd thing got kind of right, was the everything slightly too big aesthetic. Everything being too big. The guns the size of pianos. That was.
It then makes the jokes in Dredd there, where you're talking about excess, and one of the jokes about it is excessive violence, excessive seriousness. Yeah. The funny thing about Dredd is that Dredd is excessively serious. All the excess, which is what's in RoboCop. Then what you're saying is you're blowing everything up to too big a size. Suddenly you've got something from the mid-70s, which is about things being different sizes. And you go, well, that's Monty Python's cartoons, the Great Big Foot. That's the Goodies, the big kitten on Post Office Tower. There was a lot of humour at the time about things being the wrong size, or too big or too small, and playing with magical effects to do that on TV in the comedy you watched as a kid. And this felt like it was completely part of that. They built this mad world where there were these huge buildings that looked like pepper pots or whatever, and it was all carefully built to be too big, and to the point where it was silly, and then you laughed but enjoyed the action.
I guess at the time, did you guys feel that way or is it more of reflective? Because obviously that kind of reflected the dystopian nature of the aesthetic, and also the fact that in a place like Mega City 1, it was like, it's so vast that it's easy for you to be forgotten, and so there's almost like this lack of significance, which Judge Dredd was always kind of indifferent to. So
that was really scary as a kid.
Yeah, at the time, it really was.
That was the black humour of because it was all about, because especially at the time you were reading the news and doing projects at school on unemployment, and you were watching the news, and it was really scary, and there was nuclear war, and it was frightening. Weirdly, 2000 AD making that into a joke, like the worst city in the world with the worst unemployment and the worst. There's a nuclear desert outside. That was on TV the same time as Edge of Darkness and Threads and things, the really scary shows that your parents were watching. But I suppose it made it palatable for kids to think about the most horrible ideas, but in a funny way.
I suppose in many ways that's what makes it. I know, we keep coming back to Dredd, and 2000 AD is so much more than Dredd. But I think the reason we keep coming back to Dredd is because it's the one which gets that synthesis the most perfect between the grimness of the subject matter and the sort of the bleak humor with stupidity. Because you did also have strips that were more straightforwardly funny, like Sam Slade Robo Hunter was.
Oh God, that was funny.
That was a comedy strip almost. I mean, it had sort of action and adventure and a bit of violence in it, but the whole point was it was a funny strip. And then you've got other ones where the subject matter was so intensely grim that when the humor comes in, it has to be surreal, like Road Trooper. So Road Trooper's like the most bleak scenario imaginable, but then it gets to Europa, where it's an entire continent that's gone crazy. I always
remember his self-heating mug. I don't know why that was more important than anything else, because I remember you used it to outsmart some heat-seeking missiles that time, and I was like,
Rishi Sunak's got one of those.
And the thing is, when you're a kid reading that, you think that would work. Yeah, that would work. Yeah, that's what I'd do.
Yeah, and I feel like it was easier to create than a lawmaker, which would also definitely work as well. That was the first time I'd really heard about the concept of armor-piercing bullets.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
Yeah.
How does it work as? I mean, obviously there's satire here, which is like a sort of a long British tradition, and there's a sort of sense that this is quite a British brand of humour that's shot through all of this, whatever that means. But certainly there is a tradition of satire. But I'm guessing that most of the satire is probably lost on its original audience. Like when I was a kid, I didn't care about, I wasn't really caring about that. But then there is always also this sort of absurd, just absurd stuff, like you mentioned Monty Python, kind of weirdness, which is just, like spaghetti coming to life to eat you, why not? It's like that kind of thing. How does who is the satire for? That's a question, I suppose.
I think as a kid, when someone's giving you something good. And I think as a kid, I was constantly, I don't know if I hope it's the same now for kids, because they're given a lot of very good culture. I keep saying this to my kid, going, God, you have no idea how good Pixar and Marvel and all this. It's really good. Yes. But the quality of it, I think 2008 was a moment where you went, oh, you've made something for me and you've made it really brilliant. So some of it I was aware, because I watched TV at the same time. So I was watching, I don't know, Columbo or whatever was on the TV for grown-ups, and aware that it wasn't for me, but it was still really good, that I enjoyed it. I think you were used to tuning in to stuff that was aimed over your head and feeling flattered that they were aiming over your head, because at least they weren't talking down to you. And there was a lot of feeling with, to link it to Monty Python, one of the things I found really exciting about that kind of comedy, which tended to be men talking and saying, man of the world, hey, this is how the world works. Oh, you'll understand this when you're older. This is what a job's like. This is what the government's like. That you thought, well, I'll listen in on this. I'll eavesdrop on this, because it will be information like eavesdropping on an older cousin or an older brother. They'll tell you what's coming up next. And 2000 AD seemed to be made by the same kind of grumpy men who were making TV satire, or making Splitting Image and Not Uncut News and Private Eye. And you went, oh, they meet in a pub and they moan about Mrs. Thatcher, and then she's a robot in this. So what I'll do is I'll watch this, and this will help me understand when Mrs. Thatcher comes on TV. She was a robot in that Sam Slade strip last week, and it was a sort of a little guidebook to what was coming up. I read it quite avidly as for that man of the world tone. There was a lot of stuff had around then. I'm using the gender thing because it was blokes in offices who'd said, kid, this is coming. You'll have to deal with this shit. And I liked that because it was a lot easier than watching some grim...
Or having someone try to articulate the state of economy and being on Newsround.
Yeah.
I feel like, or like Blue Peter, I think 2000 AD, even though like I might have not been as politically astute to pick up on the satire at the time, what it did do is make me more accepting, make my palate more aware of, being prepared to distrust authority. And
that's really important.
Yeah.
It gave you a worldview.
Yeah, exactly, like a worldview. And and it probably was able to be achieved because of the time taken by British creators to actually make an accurate analysis of America, or basically subverting the image that America was purporting to the world, which is why so many of the stories are either aesthetically reminiscent of certain periods of American history or American military imperialism. And like you said, it was like almost prep to, or sparked like an air of cynicism. But it was healthy in the same way that the kind of wanderlust that you'd have about like futuristic worlds and the universe on a larger scale, but it was also giving you that trepidation to kind of not have this almost I guess made me mature out of the Star Wars phase.
Yeah. Where
you're kind of like, long in a galaxy far away, people are still relatively humanoid and speak English and follow the same kind of like Western culture and customs, as opposed to these different worlds which are considered humanity to be somewhat incidental.
It was very good on alienness about, one of the things I find is a good comic shtick, which is in Harry Harrison and is in Douglas Adams and is in 2000 AD and in Kurt Vonnegut, is orbiting above the planet and going, puny humans, they are so foolish. And this had a Tharg as an editor, which everyone who made 2000 AD objected to, but was a great voice for kids to go, oh,
that's great idea.
if you hovered above the planet, you'd look so silly. And that was encouraged you as a kid to go, well, hang on, can I take a step back from what I'm being told at school, what my parents are telling me, and look at what this actually means? And you end up with being able to then accept quite powerful stuff like Strontium Dog, which is about outsiderhood and disability and race and prejudice. And it's smuggled in as a sci-fi thing, but that's not in 2000 AD. They go into the bar in 2000 AD and no one makes an issue about there being loads of different races in there. They all just get along. But in Strontium Dog, they said this is going to be a problem, that you're going to have to get on with each other. And there'll be camps for some of you, as an allegory of the Second World War. And that's pretty strong meat for kids. And at the same time as that, it had a big Viking who talks in a funny voice and a little alien who went gronk. So it wasn't like pompous.
No, but by the same token, there's an entire story arc where it turns out that Johnny is the long lost son of the fascist leader of Britain who tried to exterminate the mutants. And then just for a kick, and they send him back in time to arrest Hitler in a completely different strand.
The Schicklgruber grab, what a great
The Schicklgruber grab, yeah. So I think that they obviously, there was obviously a bit of a bee in a bonnet there. But
I think it was dealt with very lightly. And I think that when you talk about sort of changing your opinions and opening your mind to new worldviews, that to sort of say, here's an adventure story about a mutant bounty hunter, which is very Guardians of the Galaxy-ish in its sort of aesthetic and things like that. I don't think the American version of this, because my period of reading 2000 AD ran into sort of Rambo culture with America, where the idea was you give a guy a gun and he was the hero of the movie and he just mowed everyone down. And as long as he had the gun, he was right. And at the same time as that, I was reading 2000 AD, where the big strip is Judge Dredd, where the guy with the authority who is out for the law is wrong most of the time. And I think the moment that the scales fall from your eyes as a kid and you realise Judge Dredd's not the goodie is the biggest moment of anyone's teenage. Because you go, I appear to be politically active. Hooray.
It's absolutely that sort of Paul Verhoeven kind of approach to the material where you can take it at face value, like Starship Troopers. You can take it totally at face value, but if you're still taking it at face value at the end of Starship Troopers, where they're just blatantly in Nazi uniforms, not even pretending anymore. And that's the thing with Dredd, where it's he kind of is the hero, and you are kind of rooting for him, but the whole setup that he is working within is like, hang on. It's not Star Trek, folks. He is at best a necessary evil.
Yeah.
Is the best way of thinking of Dredd. He is at best a necessary evil. And sort of his redeeming feature, if you like, is the lack of relish he takes in what he does. Is that he's not a sadist, but he is a fascist. Because he is
following orders.
Arm of a police state.
What he says is, as long as a fascist isn't having fun, they're fine. What a great message for kids.
The scenario it creates is sort of, what are you going to do? We've got a walled city with 800 million people, and like 90% of them are on the dole. What are you going to do?
I think as well that really worked. I think as a kid, that joke, even that philosophy is really easy to understand, because it's a school, and everyone knows at school that you need the tough teachers. One of the things that you learn as a school kid, that you go, that teacher's a bastard, but God, without him, that lesson would be chaos. That allegory is so easy to understand as a kid because it's a barrel of monkeys. Every classroom is. Dredd as an archetype is really easy to understand for a kid because he's the mean teacher. And I love the fact that they managed to do this incredible allegory about fascism and free will and make it so kids could understand it by making it a joke about a tough teacher.
Yes, it's perfect. It's so good.
That as well, the crossover into RoboCop, which you keep mentioning, because I think the funny thing is that culturally, film is respected, so people have analysed RoboCop and say it's great without saying it was all stolen from 2000 AD. I remember talking to Charlie Brooker, I work with a lot on things, and Charlie we were talking about favourite comedy movies, and he said RoboCop's one of his favourite comedy movies. He said it's either Airplane or RoboCop, my two favourite comedy movies. I was nattering to him, I said, shit, it never occurred to me. Black Mirror, which we talked about earlier on, is a piece of social satire, which is very well regarded now. He said, I'm just writing RoboCop. I can't work out why no one gets the joke. They keep thinking it's serious science fiction. He said, but it's all written in the tone of 2000 AD, and it's all written in the tone of RoboCop. It's meant to be those stories we read then. And I think if you're talking about cultural influence about, And Charlie's a comedy writer. He certainly wasn't a drama writer. He was borrowing that stuff and pulling it across to say, let's make points about now, but knowing that was entirely inspired by his love of 2000 AD and RoboCop. And that now goes into things that win Emmys for thought-provoking, dark drama about technology. And you went, it's just the 2000 AD, that's all it is.
I always wondered also about, maybe there's an answer to this, I don't know, but like the connection with Mad Max, and Mad Max 2 especially, which is so 2008. It's like this, in some ways, that is the most 2000 AD kind of thing out there. And it's ludicrously funny as well.
And on that point of Mad Max, there's also a lot to be said for the influence of 2000 AD on Japanese comics and anime. And I made that link, just a synaptic link with Mad Max as well, because the aesthetic there influenced so many of the dystopian-based animes as well. But yeah, 2000 AD would have definitely contributed to that as well. And at the same time, while probably borrowing the influence from there, especially with like ABC Warriors and the whole mech thing and the robots. But yeah, definitely.
How 2000 AD was Squid Game, if you're talking about effects on
television.
Really? I watched that. So,
oh my God, yeah.
And Train to Busan as well, right? As we ended, yeah. So.
But my wife said, "What's it like?" And I went, "It's just 2000 AD. It's just the reason the world's gone mad." It's so weird when the world goes mad for something, and you go, "It's just that again." It's just that
again. Well, exactly.
The humor's part of it.
Well, in much the same way that I remember reading some reviews of, again, the Sylvester Stallone Dredd movie, which even if it got the tone completely wrong, got the look completely right. Complaining about how derivative so much of the visual aspect of it was from various other 80s bits of sci-fi. Me thinking, actually, that's where, the Judge Dredd comic book is where those movies got all that shit from.
And a lot of those guys like Brendan McCarthy and things went into storyboarding and design for movies. So a lot of the artists were then poached to make Hollywood films look like they look. So the sci-fi, obviously the look of it is that, but I think as well the aesthetic and the humour of it is smuggled in at the same time.
Funnily enough, what you said about Mad Max 2, I think there's another element right there of it being the fact that it's not American. Fact that it's a bunch of Australian hippies out in the middle of the outback trying to make a sci-fi epic with literally sellotape and string. And the fact that it has to slightly take the piss out of itself. It's just like, well, we're not cool, are we, guys? No, we're just a bunch of assholes in the middle of the desert. You know what I mean?
That's Taika Waititi doing Thor Ragnarok as well. Is you've got an outsider who's given the toy set to play with and does their own version of it. I think maybe that's one of the things that 2000 AD teaches you is you can't, because everyone talks about how original 2000 AD was, but it was a collage. It had look at Dredd's Dirty Harry plus this plus that, bits of Damage Alley. There's all this stuff pasted together, but done with a sort of a piratical knowledge that you're stealing loads of stuff and you don't give a shit because you're going to bend it to your own will.
They did steal a great deal.
Yeah. I remember being excited by that notion of sort of collage and sampling and not caring because it felt, it's cowboyish. It's just...
It got into quite serious trouble over that one.
That was so exciting.
I don't know. I think it was the McDonald's Burger King thing, actually.
Both of those were banned until really recently. You can get them now bound properly. I mean, when that came out, and they finally published that, because I'd seen that around a friend's house and read it like sort of Samizdat, this forbidden thing. The one where they've got bad Ronald McDonald in it. It's fucking amazing. And reading it and then never reading it again. When it came out as a book, that was the most exciting Christmas I'd ever had.
And also, just mentioning Mad Max 2, just that.
Yeah.
Basically, Max is Dredd. I mean, he's just this character in the middle of it who just isn't really interested in what anyone else is sort of thinking or feeling. He's just got this thing that he needs to do, and that's it. And he's not there to have fun because there's no fun to be had. Everyone else has got their weird things going on, and they're kind of crazy and absurd. And the gyro captain is this crazy kind of weird
mad old hippie with a helicopter.
Absolutely, like something out of 2000 AD.
And I think when you can juxtapose all these characters, as Joel said, it almost speaks to the fact that it's this awakening or social awakening you have to realize the gravity of the situation and how much that parallels the current, depending on time you're judging from, the descent of human beings to kind of be led capitalistically into this ecological and economic disaster. And then it's about your decision in terms of what freedoms or what you're willing to indulge in terms of the violence that you see in order to have your protagonist return some semblance of order or law and order to that particular dystopian landscape. Because like you said, like Mad Max doesn't appear to be that emotionally connected, nor does Judge Dredd to any of the other residents of Mega City 1. But we feel connected to him because like you might be the only vessel by which, or the strong arm by which we can achieve some kind of order or distract or provide some kind of path for any kind of order in this dystopia where like human life and the value of it seems to have had such a massive decline.
But lots of 2000 AD, if you think about the classic strips that you can name and you go Strontium Dog and Road Trooper and those ones, they've got this sort of central figure who tends to be sort of quite quiet or doesn't react very much. A Clint Eastwood Man with a No Name is the standard classic 2000 AD hero. And what they do is they go on either a journey or are put into a city where they've got this huge ensemble of crazy characters they deal with every week. And because it's an episodic comic, you only get 4 to 6 pages each time around. They'll meet someone, react to them, interact with them, and then move on. And that's a really good comic structure because that's Gulliver's Travels, that's Alice in Wonderland. It's something that's used a lot in comedy. Is you have a central character who you can empathise with, or maybe more of a Tintin-y kind of who doesn't have many features, who's quite a simple Charlie Brown circle with 2 dots and a line. Very often you can't see their face or they don't have eyes. That's you. That's your character. And then around them is this crazy ensemble of weird characters with big characteristics. So Hammerstein's in the middle, he's got dead eyes, but there's this wild team of ABC warriors, eccentrics around him. Well, that's a comedy show. You've got one guy in the middle who's you. You've got Tim in the office.
You've got the straight man, then you've got the straight man,
you've got
comic
the person
relief.
who's you.
Yeah.
That is comic writing, and it's not comic book writing. That is comic writing. That's how you write a sitcom. That's how you write an ensemble sitcom. And so many 2000 AD things have that. They have a stalwart figure in the middle who you kind of follow, but they meet crazy people, and that's good comedy.
On that note, I know you have things to go to, and we're out of time. So I just want to say thank you very much. I mean, I know we could talk about this for another 10 or 12 hours, but but thank you so much for joining us on this panel and dissecting this interesting comedy animal. I've tasked with ending by saying Splundig Verthrig, which I don't know if I've ever said aloud, actually. Splundig Verthrig. It feels good.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.